My name is Serafina Rowe. I am 31 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that the deepest fractures were those carved by love lost to another. I was wrong. The most profound breaks, the ones that splinter all the way to the soul, are inflicted by the hands that were supposed to hold you. I learned this on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, when a certified letter arrived not with a greeting, not with a question of my well-being, but with the cold, sterile language of the law. The property located at 417 Hawthorne Lane, it read, is to be transferred to your brother, Julian Rowe, or we will proceed with legal action. The house on Hawthorne Lane. My small cottage with the periwinkle blue door and the climbing roses I had planted myself. The sanctuary I had saved for, penny by painstaking penny, since I was a teenager. It was the first door in my life that opened with a key that was truly mine. My only crime, it seemed, was to have built a life for myself without needing anyone's permission. And for that, my own parents were prepared to burn it to the ground. Have you ever watched the people who gave you life try to dismantle the one you built? Have you ever had to choose between the family you were born into and the person you have fought to become? This is the story of how I learned that some roots are not meant to anchor you, but to be gently, firmly severed, so that you can finally grow toward the sun. My name is Serafina Rowe, and perhaps I learned the language of self-sufficiency too young. No one in my family seemed to notice. At 12, I mastered the art of making a pot roast because my mother, Catherine, sighed one evening that I was old enough to contribute. By 15, I was navigating the city bus system from our quiet suburb to the humming chaos of the Bluebird Diner, where I worked weekend shifts washing dishes and bussing tables. My younger brother, Julian, 2 years my junior, was still being chauffeured by our mother in her pristine sedan. At 16, I took a second job, filing paperwork at a small accounting firm after school. The pay was meager, but I divided it with the precision of a seasoned treasurer, 1/3 into a savings account I'd opened myself, 1/3 for my school lunches and bus fare, and the final third for secondhand textbooks and the occasional novel that offered a world far from my own. Julian never had such worries. His world was a sun-drenched room at the back of our house, filled with a state-of-the-art camera, a brand-new editing suite, and stacks of books on cinematography. He has a gift, Catherine would say, her voice soft with a reverence she never used for me. You have to understand, Serafina. He's a boy and he has a vision. Such things must be nurtured. I thought I had a vision once, too. I remember the day the thick envelope from the state university arrived. It was crisp and white, and inside, the letter promised a full academic scholarship. Tears blurred my vision as I ran into the living room, clutching it to my chest. I got in, and they gave me a full scholarship. My father, Arthur, didn't look up from his financial news program. My mother took the letter, her eyes scanning it with a dispassionate air. You'll still need to file the FAFSA for processing, won't you? I nodded eagerly. Yes. I just need your signatures. No, Arthur said, his voice sharp and final. We are not putting our financial information into a government database. Find a more affordable school. I said nothing. The scholarship, a vibrant red and gold emblem of my future, dissolved into thin air. I was not yet 18. I could not sign for myself. The following year, Julian was enrolled in a prestigious film academy in California. The tuition was over $30,000 a semester. Talent is an investment, Catherine explained to our relatives at Christmas, as if it were an immutable law of nature. So, I enrolled in a community college. I took night classes, my eyelids heavy after long days at the diner and the accounting firm. While my high school friends posted photos from their dorm rooms and spring break trips, I was learning the quiet hum of an office after hours, the scent of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner becoming the backdrop to my education. Julian, meanwhile, pursued his vision. He attempted to launch an independent film studio twice. The first time, according to my mother, he was swindled by a dishonest partner. The second time, he was simply short on capital. Both times, my parents co-signed business loans for him, totaling over $65,000. When the hard drive on my 5-year-old laptop finally gave out, I asked them if they would consider co-signing a small, $2,000 loan for a replacement. You don't need anything fancy for that little degree of yours, my father had said dismissively. Besides, Julian needs to upgrade his sound equipment. It's for his career. I never asked them for anything again. But I kept a record. Not of grudges, but of facts. In a simple, cloth-bound journal, I listed every significant expense and every poignant memory since I was 15. The price of every textbook, the amount of every tuition payment I made, the exact date I finally paid off my student loans. I even wrote down what Catherine said when I had to miss Thanksgiving to work a double shift. That isn't a life, Serafina. I wrote that quote in blue ink and underlined it twice. When Julian lost his phone, my parents bought him the newest model the very next day. I used a simple flip phone until I was 27. My priorities were different. What I craved wasn't a new phone or a fancy computer. It wasn't even the university education I had lost. What I truly wanted was to be seen. Not with pity, and not with the weary acceptance that said, Serafina knows how to take care of herself. I wanted to be seen as their daughter, as an integral part of our family, not just the responsible, quiet shadow that trailed behind the brilliant light of her brother. But that acknowledgement never came. So, I learned to rely on myself not as a choice, but as an instinct for survival. At 24, I was hired by Oakwood Financial Partners. The promotions were slow but steady. I saved relentlessly. I bought my house without a mortgage, paying in full with a cashier's check that represented a decade and a half of deferred dreams. The last birthday gift I received from my parents was a gift certificate to a home goods store, valid only on purchases over $600. They always said Julian could achieve greatness if he just had a bit more support. That greatness materialized as a mountain of debt, 2 failed business ventures, and a fiancé with eyes as hard and bright as polished stones. But when I finally said no to their plan for my life, they called me selfish, ungrateful, a traitor to the family. And me? All I wanted was to keep my small house on Hawthorne Lane, with its warm, honey-colored floors and the climbing roses that were finally beginning to bloom. I didn't know they had already hired a lawyer. I didn't know they were willing to paint me as a villain in a story they had written long ago. But now I understand. It was never just about the house. It was about forcing me back into the role they had assigned me, the quiet, obedient daughter who always stepped aside. It was a Saturday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and impending rain. I had just poured myself a glass of iced tea when a gleaming silver SUV, one I recognized instantly, pulled into my gravel driveway. My father emerged first, his polo shirt starched to a perfect crispness. Catherine followed, carrying a bakery box with the careful reverence of a peace offering. But what made my stomach clench was the sight of Julian climbing out of the back seat. His usually unkempt hair was styled, his clothes, a linen shirt and dark jeans, looked new. He was accompanied by a young woman in a flowing floral dress. Her hand rested possessively on her swollen belly. I had never seen her before. Serafina, this is Isabel, my mother said as they reached the porch, her tone bright and forced. Julian's fiancé. And as you can see, we have wonderful news. Isabel offered a small, practiced smile, her hand stroking her abdomen in a slow, circular motion. But as a woman who had spent years observing the minute details of human behavior, I noticed something odd. The mound of her belly seemed unnaturally static. As she walked up the steps, it didn't shift or settle with the natural weight of pregnancy. It sat high and firm, like a perfect, separate sculpture. I held the door open, my body a rigid pillar of civility. Please come in. They arranged themselves around my small dining table as if they were a board of directors. Catherine placed the box of pastries in the center. You know why we're here, Serafina, she began with a heavy sigh. My father spoke next, his voice low and devoid of warmth, the same tone he used when discussing quarterly losses at his firm. Julian is about to be a father. He needs a stable home, a place for his child to grow up. You're established. You have a good career. We thought you could afford to be generous. I looked at Julian. He was staring intently at the wood grain of the table, his jaw tight. So, what are you proposing? I asked, my voice preternaturally calm. That I pack my bags and leave my own house? My Aunt Diane, my mother's sister who had arrived with them, chimed in. You could stay with me for a while, dear. I have a spare room since my Mark moved out. For how long, Aunt Diane? I asked, my gaze sweeping over their expectant faces. A year? 5 years? Until the child goes to college. Silence. Isabel sat perfectly still, her hand never leaving the floral fabric covering her secret. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes locking with my father's. This house is in my name. I bought it with money I earned. None of you contributed a single dollar. Don't be so cold, Serafina, Catherine chided, her voice sharp with disapproval. Family is supposed to support one another. Then why didn't you support me when you refused to sign the FAFSA, costing me a full scholarship? I asked, the old wound aching as if it were fresh. Or when you co-signed $65,000 in loans for Julian's failed businesses? Julian flinched. Isabel finally spoke, her voice soft and cloying. I know this is hard for you. I want our baby to have a proper home. Not some cramped apartment. Then perhaps you should both get jobs, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Serafina, that is cruel. Isabel is pregnant. You can't possibly understand the sacrifices of a mother. Oh, I understand sacrifice, I said, my gaze drifting to Isabel's perfectly round stomach. I sacrificed my youth, working 2 jobs to put myself through school. I sacrificed my comfort, living in a tiny apartment with a leaky roof. And Isabel, I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, doesn't even know how to wear a prosthetic pregnancy belly correctly. The air in the room turned to ice. Isabel's face went white. My father slammed his palm on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. That's enough. We came here to be reasonable. If you won't transfer the house willingly, we'll take another path. What path is that? I asked. A legal one, he said, his voice flat. We can contest the ownership. We can argue that our lifelong financial and emotional investment in you contributed to your ability to purchase it. So, this wasn't a family visit. It was a final, formal threat before the declaration of war. Catherine looked away. Aunt Diane studied her hands. And Julian, my brother, finally lifted his head and said the only thing he would say all afternoon. I just really need this, Serafina. You can make a home anywhere. And I really need all of you to leave, I said, standing up. Now. They left without another word, not one of them meeting my eyes as they filed out the door, leaving the box of untouched pastries on my table like a monument to their failed mission. 2 days later, my phone began to chime relentlessly. A text from a former classmate, Serafina, what's going on? I saw Julian's post. Did you really throw him and his pregnant fiancée out? My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened my laptop. Julian's social media page was a torrent of performative grief. The profile picture was a professionally shot photo of him and Isabel, her belly prominent, both staring wistfully out a window. The post itself was a masterpiece of manipulation. My sister just evicted us from her home, knowing my fiancé is pregnant. That house was my mother's dream for her children. All we asked for was a safe place for our baby, but her only words were, "This is my house. Leave." I guess this is the price of success. You lose your family, and you lose your heart. The comments were a cascade of outrage and judgment. So cruel. To do that to your own blood. I'm praying for that poor baby. Some people get rich and forget where they came from. The words didn't wound my pride. They struck something deeper, something far more fragile. The young girl still inside me who had once believed that if she was just good enough, quiet enough, and hardworking enough, her family would finally love her. The next morning, when I walked into the offices of Oakwood Financial Partners, the air felt different. My assistant, Clara, met me with a worried expression. Serafina, Mr. Sterling wants to see you. In the sterile conference room, my manager, Michael Sterling, and the head of HR, a woman named Helen, sat waiting. Serafina, Michael began, avoiding my eyes. We received an anonymous email last night. It contained some personal information. It alleged a history of emotional instability, including a brief hospitalization for severe depression when you were 19. The blood drained from my face. I remembered that time vividly. It was the year after I lost the scholarship, when the weight of my double life, student and full-time worker, had become unbearable. I had collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. My parents had told everyone I had a bad flu. "We have no right to pry into your personal life," Helen said smoothly. "However, given the nature of our work, client trust and employee stability are paramount. We believe it would be best for you to take a leave of absence to resolve these personal matters." "This isn't a termination," Michael added quietly. "Just a temporary measure." Temporary. A temporary exile based on a lie sent by my own family. I drove home in a daze, pulled the curtains closed, and sank onto my sofa. The afternoon light that usually filled my living room was gone. My gaze fell on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, me and my grandfather, Walter, at my community college graduation. I was 19, my smile wide and genuine. His hand rested on my shoulder, his pride a palpable warmth. He was the only family member who had come. I walked into my study and pulled my old cloth-bound journal from the desk drawer. The ledger of my life. On a fresh page, I wrote a new entry. "If they choose to fight with lies, I will fight with the truth." I opened my laptop and typed "family law attorney, asset dispute specialist" into the search bar. The results were a list of high-powered firms with retainers that would cost more than my first car. Then I remembered a name. Leo Ortiz. A bright, determined young man who had taken a free financial literacy course I taught at the local community center 2 years ago. I had helped him with his resume. He was just starting out then, but he was sharp. I found his simple, self-made website. One sentence on his homepage stood out: "I believe the law must serve justice, especially when justice is obscured by the complexities of family." I sent him a short, direct email: "I need a lawyer. But more than that, I need to know I'm not crazy for wanting to protect what is mine." 3 hours later, my phone rang. "Serafina Rowe? This is Leo Ortiz. I remember you. If you're willing to tell me the whole story, I'm ready to listen." A week later, I was sitting at my dining table, sketching out a financial timeline of my life for Leo, when the familiar rumble of an old engine echoed in the driveway. It was a sound from my childhood, the faded, forest green Ford pickup, its paint worn thin from decades of sun and rain. My grandfather, Walter Rowe, 82 years old, climbed out, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of age. He was carrying a small, metal lockbox, its silver latch tarnished and dull. "Grandpa," I said, opening the door. "You're here." "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "Brought you something." He placed the box on the table and unlocked it with a tiny, brass-colored key. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were artifacts of a life I thought was lost to memory. A faded passbook from a long-closed local bank. A bundle of letters tied with a simple blue ribbon. And a notarized, handwritten copy of my grandmother's will. Beatrice Rowe. I traced her elegant, looping signature, a script I remembered from birthday cards. "She gave this to me right before she passed," he said softly. "Told me to hold on to it. Said if the day ever came that her girl was being wronged by her own, I was to give it to you." I unfolded the will, my heart pounding. My eyes fell on the final paragraph. "I, Beatrice Rowe, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the sum of $38,000 held in a savings account at Asheville First Legacy Bank to my granddaughter, Serafina Rowe. This sum is to be used exclusively for her college education, so she may have the opportunities she is brave enough to earn." Beside it was the bank's official seal, dated the month I turned 12. I opened the passbook. The deposits were small and steady. The withdrawals were another story. A series of large sums withdrawn over a period of 2 years. The final withdrawal, for the entire remaining balance, was dated 1 week after my father had refused to sign my FAFSA forms. The signature on the withdrawal slip was clear: Arthur Rowe. My father. I don't remember breathing. I only remember the steady, comforting weight of my grandfather's hand on my shoulder. "Your grandma knew," he said. "She always said the truth has a way of waiting until you're strong enough to hear it." My meeting with Leo that afternoon lasted for 4 hours. He listened intently as I laid out the contents of the lockbox on his conference table. He examined the passbook and the copy of the will, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This changes everything, Serafina," he said, his voice low. "This isn't a simple property dispute anymore. This is financial fraud. And with the will as evidence of intent, it's a profound breach of fiduciary duty." He leaned forward. "With this, we can subpoena the original bank records. We can get a signature analysis on that withdrawal slip. If he withdrew it as your legal guardian, but cannot prove it was used for your benefit, and in fact, used it to fund your brother's ventures, that's a criminal offense." A cold resolve settled deep in my bones. "And what about Isabel?" I asked. Leo's jaw tightened. "I have a friend who works as a private investigator. We can do a background check. If she has no medical records of a pregnancy, no prenatal visits, this whole thing could be considered a conspiracy to commit fraud." He opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "You once taught me how to use spreadsheets to find the story hidden in the numbers," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "Now, let me show you how we use the law to bring the truth into the light." That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a historian, carefully piecing together the fragmented story of my own life. Each saved dollar, each broken promise, each quiet dismissal, they weren't just personal wounds. They were evidence. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Leo. "Tomorrow, let's file the countersuit." His reply came back in seconds. "We start first thing in the morning." The private investigator's report arrived a week later in a sealed manila envelope. Leo called me before I opened it. "Are you sitting down, Serafina?" "Just tell me, Leo." "Okay." First, Isabel. Her real name is Isabel Foster. She is not pregnant. The PI found the online order for the realistic silicone pregnancy belly, 8 to 9 month size, from a novelty store, shipped to a P.O. box Julian opened 2 months ago. Worse, she did this before. 3 years ago, in Oregon. She conned a man into putting her on the deed to his house, then disappeared. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. Did Julian know? He more than knew. He planned it. The PI found security footage from a coffee shop of them rehearsing their story. He was coaching her on how to hold the belly, how to talk about her symptoms. He paused. "And Serafina, there's more. The credit card theft from 2 years ago, the one you thought was from a skimmer at a gas pump? It was Julian. The IP address for the fraudulent online purchases traces back to his apartment. The packages were delivered there. The memory was sharp and painful. The frantic calls to the bank, the months of repairing my credit, the shame. Part of me had always wanted to believe Julian was just weak, easily led astray. But this wasn't weakness. This was a cold, calculated cruelty. And Isabel's last name? Foster, Leo continued, his voice softer now. Does that mean anything to you? No, I said, my mind racing. Your Aunt Diane's maiden name. It was Foster. The phone felt heavy in my hand. The room tilted. They're cousins. First cousins, Leo confirmed. And according to the PI, your Aunt Diane was in on the entire plan. She was promised a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the house. A family conspiracy. A web of lies so tangled and dark it was hard to comprehend. It wasn't just my parents and my brother. It was a coordinated attack. Leo, I whispered, is this enough? It's more than enough, he said, his voice firm. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and attempted extortion. We file the countersuit, and we hand this entire report over to the district attorney's office. This is a criminal matter now. I looked out my window at the climbing roses on the trellis, their pink and white blossoms a stark contrast to the ugliness I had just uncovered. I had not started this war, but they had left me no choice but to finish it. Let's do it, I said. Let's bring it all into the light. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse an hour early. I sat on a polished oak bench in the echoing marble hallway, a single, slim briefcase on my lap. Inside, everything was organized into color-coded files, blue for financial records, red for family documents, yellow for digital evidence, and green for my grandmother's will and letters. I had spent weeks preparing, not to persuade them, but to anchor myself in the solid, irrefutable truth. They arrived together, a united front of deception. My father in his tailored suit, my mother in a cream-colored dress, her expression a mask of maternal grief. Julian stood between them, his face pale, trying to project an image of a wronged son. And Isabel, in a pale blue maternity dress, her hand resting on the silicone mound beneath it. They were all wearing a small, white rose pinned to their lapels, a symbol, my mother would later tell a reporter, of purity and family love. I wore a simple navy blue dress. No adornments. No symbols. Just the quiet weight of the truth in my briefcase. The hearing began at 9. Their lawyer, a man with a booming voice and a theatrical flair, painted a picture of a heartbroken family, of devoted parents who had given everything, only to be cast aside by a cold, ungrateful daughter. All they ask, Your Honor, he concluded, his voice trembling with emotion, is for a roof over their unborn grandchild's head. When it was my turn, I stood and addressed the judge, a woman in her 60s with intelligent, discerning eyes. Your Honor, I will be representing myself, with Mr. Ortiz present as my legal counsel. I opened my briefcase and began. Calmly, methodically, I presented the evidence. The deed to my house in my name alone. The bank statements showing the source of the funds. Then, I presented the copy of my grandmother's will and the passbook from her savings account. I showed the court the withdrawal slip signed by my father and the corresponding bank statements from Julian's failed business ventures. A murmur went through the courtroom. My father stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and fury. I moved on to the credit card statements from 2 years prior, alongside the investigator's report tracing the fraudulent purchases to Julian's IP address. And then I submitted the evidence regarding Isabel. The online order for the prosthetic belly. The report of her previous fraud in Oregon. Finally, with the clerk's assistance, I played a short video on the courtroom monitors. It was security footage from a pharmacy, dated the day before the hearing. It showed Isabel entering a restroom. A minute later, she emerged, her dress now hanging loosely around her. The pregnant belly was gone. A collective gasp filled the room. The silence was absolute. Leo stood and handed a file to the bailiff. Your Honor, we are formally requesting that the court refer this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation into conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and extortion against Mr. Arthur Rowe, Mrs. Catherine Rowe, Mr. Julian Rowe, Ms. Isabel Foster, and Ms. Diane Foster. Judge Monroe looked from the screen to the pale, stricken faces of my family. She banged her gavel once, the sound sharp and final. The plaintiff's petition is denied. The court finds overwhelming evidence of malicious prosecution and attempted fraud. The request for a criminal investigation is hereby granted. I did not look at them as they were escorted out. I simply closed my briefcase, took a deep breath, and felt, for the first time in my life, the profound and unshakable peace of a truth finally told. The aftermath was swift and public. The Asheville Gazette ran a front-page story. Local family's property dispute reveals shocking fraud conspiracy. The article was factual and unsparing, laying out the evidence I had presented in court. The story of the fake pregnancy and my grandmother's stolen inheritance became local news. My phone, which had once been a source of pain, was now filled with messages of support from old friends, colleagues, and even strangers. But the message that mattered most came from my cousin, Mark, Aunt Diane's son. Serafina, I am so sorry. I had no idea. What you did, it took a courage I've never had. Thank you for speaking the truth. A week after the hearing, Leo and I filed for, and were granted, a permanent restraining order against Julian, Isabel, and my parents. It's not about revenge, I told him as I signed the papers. It's about closure. It's about ensuring the door, once closed, stays that way. 3 days later, as I was pruning the climbing roses, my mother appeared at the end of my driveway. She was alone. She wore a simple gray coat, her face gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed. She held a small paper bag from a local bakery. Serafina, she began, her voice a fragile whisper. Can we just talk? I stood my ground, the pruning shears still in my hand. I didn't know it would go so far, she wept, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted to help your brother. I thought if you would just give in a little. Give in a little? I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. You asked me to give up my home. You lied, you conspired against me, you tried to destroy my reputation. That is not asking for a little. That is asking for my soul. I know, she sobbed. I know I was wrong. I looked into her eyes and saw not true remorse, but the terror of a woman who had lost control of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. You can be my mother again, I said slowly, the words forming a boundary of their own, when you understand that I am no longer the daughter you can sacrifice. I am the woman I built myself to be. I turned and walked back into my house, closing the periwinkle blue door gently but firmly behind me. She did not knock again. The bag of pastries remained on the porch until dusk. I finally brought it inside and placed it on the counter, not as an act of forgiveness, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the end. Some things can be accepted without being condoned. My life did not return to what it was. It became something richer, quieter, and more authentic. I started a free financial literacy workshop on Thursday evenings at the public library. The small room filled with women of all ages, their faces etched with stories of financial betrayal, hidden debt, and the quiet fear of not knowing. In their questions, I heard the echoes of my own past, and in sharing my knowledge, I began to heal. On weekends, my grandfather and I started a project. Using reclaimed wood from his old barn, we began building a long, sturdy dining table for my backyard. How big should we make it, Grandpa? I asked, sanding a rough plank of oak. Big enough for 12, he said, his eyes twinkling. Always build a table with room for one more than you expect. You never know who might need a seat. We worked for weeks, the scent of sawdust and wood stain filling the air. Each nail hammered, each joint secured, felt like an act of reconstruction. One Saturday afternoon, as we were applying the final coat of oil, my neighbors began to appear, one by one, carrying covered dishes and bottles of wine. We figured it was time for a housewarming party, said Mrs. Sterling from next door, placing a large casserole on the newly finished table. And we wanted you to know, Serafina, that this neighborhood is proud to have you. I looked around at the faces, some familiar, some new, all smiling with a genuine warmth I had rarely known. They filled the chairs around the table, their laughter mingling with the chirping of crickets as the sun set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. No one mentioned the trial. No one asked about my family. They didn't need to. They were here to celebrate the home I had fought for, the life I had claimed. Later that evening, as Leo helped me clear the dishes, he pointed to 2 empty chairs at the end of the table. You listen to your grandpa, he said with a smile. I looked at the long, beautiful table, bathed in the soft glow of string lights, surrounded by the quiet hum of my new community. This was my found family. A family built not on blood, but on shared respect, kindness, and the simple, profound act of showing up. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if the fractures with my birth family would ever truly mend. But as I stood on my back porch, breathing in the cool night air, I knew I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me. I was defined by what I had built, what I had protected, and the space I was now creating for others. The house on Hawthorne Lane was more than a home. It was a testament to the enduring strength of a woman who had learned to be her own foundation. And at the table I had built with my own hands, there would always be an open seat.